Hello, everybody. Welcome again to my basement in the blinding sun on Wednesday morning. This is a short video we're going to watch in addition to our group work on Thursday to talk about the conclusion of Dracula, which is truly wild. And this time for our video, I thought that it would be fun to do some close reading together, or rather watching me do close reading on my shared screen. So I'm going to share my screen now from my iPad. And what I'm going to do is bring up a part of the book that you will remember. It is from chapter 16 of Dracula, which is the moment that Lucy meets her final demise. She's been sucking blood of children and has proven herself to be the perfect inversion of Victorian femininity in ways we talked about in class. I'm going to put on my timer and try to talk for a short amount of time here so we don't take too long before our group work. But let's read this out loud together. So we all looked at Arthur. He saw too what we all did, the infinite kindness which suggested that his should be the hand which would restore Lucy to us as a holy and not an unholy memory. He stepped forward and said bravely, though his hand trembled and his face was as pale as snow, "My true friend, from the bottom of my broken heart, I thank you. Tell me what I am to do, and I shall not falter." Van Helsing laid a hand on his shoulder and said, "Brave lad, a moment's courage and it is done. This stake must be driven through her. It will be a fearful ordeal, be not deceived in that, but it will be only a short time, and you will then rejoice more than your pain was great. From this grim tomb you will emerge as though you tread on air. But you must not falter when once you have begun. Only think that we, your true friends, are round you, and that we pray for you all the time." "Go on," said Arthur hoarsely. "Tell me what I am to do." "Take this stake in your left hand, ready to place the point over the heart, and the hammer in your right. Then when we begin our prayer for the dead, I shall read him. I have here the book, and the others shall follow. Strike in God's name, and so that so all may be well with the dead that we love, and the undead will pass away." Arthur took the stake and the hammer, and when once his mind was set on action, his hands never trembled nor even quivered. Van Helsing opened his missal and began to read, and Quincy and I followed as well we could. Arthur placed the point over the heart, and as I looked, I could see its dint in the white flesh. Then he struck with all his might. The thing in the coffin writhed, and a hideous, blood-curdling screech came from the opened red lips. The body shook and quivered and twisted in wild contortions. The sharp white teeth champed together till the lips were cut, and the mouth was smeared with the crimson foam. But Arthur never faltered. He looked like a figure of Thor as his untrembling arm rose and fell, driving deeper and deeper the mercy-bearing stake, whilst the blood from the pierced heart welled and spurted up around it. His face was set, and high duty seemed to shine through it. The sight of it gave us courage, so that our voices seemed to ring through the little vault. And then the writhing and quivering of the body became less, the teeth seemed to champ, and the face to quiver. Finally, it lay still. The terrible task was over. The hammer fell from Arthur's hand. He reeled and would have fallen had we not caught him. The great drops of sweat sprang from his forehead, and his breath came in broken gasps. It had indeed been an awful strain on him, and he had not been forced to his task by more than human considerations. He could never have gone through with it. For a few minutes we were so taken up with him that we did not look towards the coffin. When we did, however, a murmur of startled surprise ran from one to the other of us. We gazed so eagerly that Arthur rose, for he had been seated on the ground, and came and looked too. And then a glad, strange light broke over his face and dispelled altogether the gloom of horror that lay upon it. There, in the coffin, lay no longer the foul thing that we had so dreaded and grown to hate, that the work of her destruction was yielded as a privilege to the one best entitled to it, but Lucy as we had seen her in life, with her face of unequaled sweetness and purity. True that there were there, as we had seen them in life, the traces of care and pain and waste, but these were all dear to us, for they marked her truth to what we knew. One and all, we felt that the holy calm that lay like sunshine over the wasted face and form was only an earthly token and symbol of the calm that was to reign forever. So that is a long passage, and there's tons in here to talk about, and there's no possible way that I could do an adequate close reading of this entire passage whatsoever. So we're going to look just at a couple of things, and I didn't prep this in advance. I'm just kind of doing this on the spot so you guys can see how I approach a sort of long passage like this and try to break it into smaller segments and look as carefully as I can at small details. So we can start right here at the very beginning of the passage that I selected, and we can look at the first person plural pronouns and the way in which this group of men is brought together in this task. So we have Arthur at the center of a circle of men looking in who think of themselves as a collective. And we have that reinforced as the first person plurals. The pronouns are sort of repeated as we go through. And then the hero comes out of this group and singularizes himself from it in order to sort of act on behalf of the larger group of men. And so he takes this on him like a burden, and later on he's described as having sort of taken it as a privilege, but here he doesn't want to do it. He says that he shall not falter, and so we have these images of courage and bravery, which we can see as very thinly coded masculine ideal traits according to the novel's seeming internal logic. But Arthur's not really up for the task. He's pale as snow, and we have this figure of his physical body quailing or quivering or here trembling, which we see again later as a sort of indicator of hesitation or a faltering in the course of action. But Arthur, in true phallic form, steels himself eventually against this feminine quavering and trembling and becomes firm in his task. And so this is sort of the way that we would look at the way this sort of homosocial group of men is gathered around the task of puncturing this female body that they no longer perceive as human. We'll see in a second how the thing is denied personal pronouns after the moment that we all see Lucy chucking the child in the graveyard. So the movement between human and non-human, feminine woman, Victorian ideal femininity as a kind of image of purity, and this other thing that must be vanquished in order for them to proceed. So let's look at another part, and we can kind of move maybe down here to the moment of let's call it penetration, or we could call it the kind of perverse consummation of this marriage plot, because that's kind of what it is. So notice now he didn't tremble or even quiver. So he's up for the job here, the job being a kind of euphemism I'm using for the sexual act that's here very thinly coded as a kind of penetration by a long shaft that all the men hold, but Arthur gets the chance to use. And so this is going to be important later when we see the same kind of logic used on Dracula's body himself later on, with another sort of long shaft that everybody gets to touch, but only one man gets to use. I make a joke, or you talk jokingly about this, but I want us to actually see that what we have here is the consolidation of a certain form of penetrative masculinity that's tied to the category of action. And so this dichotomy between activity and passivity is really clearly on display through the logic of so-called bravery. So Arthur has the stake and hammer. You could see that when he places the point over the heart, we have this sort of strange articles here that are non-restrictive in the sense that they're just naming off, as though in a catalog, the different aspects of this, and this same construction will come to be used on Lucy's own body in, I think, a passage that we will see below the one that I've selected, but it describes the head, the mouth, the cheeks, the eyes, not her eyes, her mouth. So the disembodiment of these objects as this world becomes separated into the thing that stabs and the thing that gets stabbed, the subject and the object. Um, and we see here the kind of incipient penetration of this vulnerable so-called white flesh as the novel clearly racializes Lucy's body yet again, even though now she has dark hair, but the penetration of this passive female flesh receives what the text calls all his might. So the sort of really clear dichotomies between an active, strong, decisive, masculine penetration and a passive, supine, white-fleshed female body that has to be vanquished here. But the trick and the twist comes, and this will be the last thing I'll say, is because, as I said, there's way too much here to talk about, and we're almost at 10 minutes, is that we see here the movement that I was talking about, where Lucy's features are removed from her, if you want, and separated out into different attributes of physicality, the sharp white teeth and the lips and the body, which shook and quivered and twisted in wild contortions. Is that good or bad? Pleasure or pain? We don't really know except for the context. And immediately following this act of really conspicuously eroticized penetration, we have here a kind of, and I'll just have to say it out loud, a sort of orgasmic scenario of crimson foam and chomping teeth and the whole 9 yards of it. Will Arthur be deterred by any of that? No, he continues. He becomes a mythical figure in the history of sort of white heroes of action. Thor. And again, we have an untrembling arm that rose and fell deeper and deeper. So we have, again, this sort of syntax of that rose and fell deeper and deeper, the repetitive cadence of that kind of mirrors this image of kind of permanent thrusting that we have here that is truly over the top in its eroticized language as the blood wells and spurts. It really is laid on real pretty thick here, and none of this would have been lost on Victorian readers. But after the orgasm, the writhing, and again now quivering, sorry, that should connect to trembling, and trembling over here. So the former Lucy's quivering finally dies down, and it lays still and peace is restored. And so the way in which the text then has to redeem this moment of eroticized penetration as a redemption of Lucy into purity is a kind of ironic and very confusing tangle of the ideologies of purity and passivity in the female form that the book seems to be invested in. So I say seems to be invested because, as we're going to see, and as we've seen here, and we'll see it with Mina lapping like a cat Dracula's blood, the specter of female pleasure and female desire is something that the book also seems to want to work very hard to banish. Is Lucy having a good time? It's hard to say, but certainly the men themselves are so desperate to produce a calm that will reign forever, a stabilization of these gender norms, that whatever aberrance we see in Lucy's performance here has to be brought back into the paradigm of purity on the one hand and voluptuousness on the other. The bad stuff has to be canceled and the good stuff preserved. How do we do it? Through a really heavily eroticized sex scene that reduces Lucy to disembodied features of her physicality. So I'm going to stop there. There's a lot more to say, and maybe I'll just stop the old share here if I can make that happen. So thanks for listening. I'm going to upload the PDF of this so you guys can look at my scribbled notes. That is how I would begin to approach a passage like this. I hope that you can approach some too. I'm going to put a couple page numbers of specific parts in the final form of the book, the final third of the book, that I'd like you to take a look at using attention like that. And we'll come together in our small groups and chat about the end of Dracula. Thanks for watching, guys. I will see you Thursday during our group times.